Hey guys, hey, Martin from Sound 7 here. So I'm starting up a new mini-series called the plugin folder. And what I'm going to be doing is shining a spotlight on plugins from across the spectrum of function, from modulations, dynamics, delays, compression, EQ, saturation, reverbs, and not really doing a review of sorts, but more a real world look at these plugins and how we might use those in our audio to get the results that we're kind of looking for, maybe to add something to our tracks that we didn't previously think about, and how you guys might kind of take something away from that, you know, to stick into your own productions. We look at the general function of the plugin, and we might overlook some other aspects of the plugin, because what I'm really interested in is just the real world application of getting results that we want quick. I think today what we're going to do is kick off with FabFilter Saturn 2, a multi-band saturation plugin. And we could use that fairly basically, like a normal saturation. It comes with a few different flavors. And we could twist up the dial knob, use the saturation, call it a day. But I think let's look at some of the other features it's got, talk about those, apply those, see what results we can get. And I'm confident, no matter your genre, no matter what you're into, what you're producing, I think you'll be able to take something away from this to apply to your own tracks, help you kind of develop and hone your sound. So yeah, let's crack on, shall we? What we got here is just a kind of like a 4 or 5 track little minimal techno loop. We got an instance of Saturn across every channel. I've got a kind of limiter on the master bus just to kind of protect your ears in case we do some any crazy kind of gain stuff. And yeah, so just taking a look at Saturn kind of from the outset, as I say, fairly basic GUI. You know, you've got drive knob and some functions down here. So let's listen to our loop and then let's look at Saturn and how we're going to join those two together. So just a 5-track kind of minimal techno, dub techno sort of loop, nothing crazy. But we got all the elements in there, you know, in terms of filling the audio spectrum, making it sound kind of fairly consistent and full. So let's focus on our kick. And by the way, look, if you're into any other genres, you're not into techno, trance, that kind of thing, you know, you're gonna have to grin and bear it, I'm afraid, because I'm a trance techno aficionado. These things will be cross-genre, you know, you'll be able to take these things away and use them regardless of whatever you're producing, hip hop, dubstep, you know, chill wave, whatever. You'll be able to take something from this. So we've got Saturn, we've got a kick here. So Saturn, yeah, standard kind of saturation. Now we can slice up our kind of bands here to give us the multi-band aspect, and let's just kind of talk through the basics a sec. So we've got drive, crank it up, make distortion, basically. Different flavors of the saturation is available to us. Tube, tape, saturation, transformer, FX, which is like smearing, scattering, big reduction, those kind of things. And mix knob, some parallel kind of processing. Feedback, amount, frequency of that feedback and kind of what area of the frequency domain that's working on. Dynamics as well, you know, fast, slow, that kind of thing. Modulation, you know, you can add modulation sources, of which there are many. So we could have an LFO kind of using the point and click modulation thing kind of characterized from Serum and a few other synths. We can drag and drop that modulation source to destination now on any parameters, kind of as we want to control the movement of any of these parameters. And I think, you know, we'll take a look at modulation in a separate video. For today, we're just looking at the kind of quick, easy stuff that we could do with Saturn to give us some good results. And as I say, we can split the audio with Saturn into bands, and we can solo mute those individual bands as well to hear them. So let's focus on our kick drum, and you know, we split there kind of roughly into low, mid, high in terms of the frequency range. As I say, we can just solo the mid, you know, see what that sounds like. We can mute the mid, take it out of that kind of audio spectrum, just listen to what's either side of that. And we've got tone controls here, and with Saturn, so once you've split the audio in the bands, you've got each control kind of works on a per band basis then, independently. So I could have, you know, drive right up on the low end, yet the middle band wouldn't be affected by that, you know, and I can apply a different flavor, different drive amount on that middle band compared to what I've got to the low band and high band and so on. So really flexible, and already you can start to see you know, the kind of power and utility this could give you. And with the tone control, what you kind of got there is, okay, so if I focus on the mid band, I could raise and lower the individual, kind of like an EQ, the individual frequency spectrum within that band. So it's like bands within band, you know, if that makes sense. So what we want to do is we've got our track, got our kick, and let's start applying this. Okay, let's do something. And I'm going to listen to this and we think, okay, what do I want to do with that kick? Some nice bottom end to it, nice to thumpy. And if we add too much saturation to the bottom end, it's going to kind of smear it out a bit, you know. I don't think we need that because it's nice and wallopy. But I want to get the kick to punch through a bit, you know, so we can hear it. So we can do that by kind of isolating the midpoint, and I think what we'll do is just increase the gain on that slightly. Okay, so you can kind of hear that mid slap, as it were, and might just of that increase the slight top end of that particular spectrum. And I think we're going to keep it on the tape flavor, but drive it up a bit to really help that kind of frequency band splay out a bit, you know, in terms of what you get from that kind of tape emulation. Let's put that back in the mix. So you can see without. I'm just going to push it up a bit. So we've kept the bottom end and you can still feel it, but now we've kind of helped that kick punch through a bit better by just adding a bit of detail, adding a bit of texture and bringing that detail out just through the saturation plugin. Move on to our hats. Now, classic kind of shaker hat, and if we look here on the audio spectrum, we've actually quite a lot of low end in that, and obviously a lot of shizzle, a lot of high end, not much in the mid range. But it's the mid range I want to isolate because there's some goodness down there. We just can't quite hear it at the moment. So let's use Saturn to bring that out. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use EQ. I'm just going to use EQ probably to just trim off the outside edges, reduce the low end of it. Okay, and then I'm going to split our audio up, and I'm going to bring that kind of midpoint up. And use Saturn to bring the rest of those highs down. You might even, we've trimmed out most of the low end on with the EQ, but any remaining I'm just pulling down as well. Crank it. That's good. Again, I think we'll go for a bit of a broken tube on that. Just to add some really nice kind of ambient grit, you know. It's pretty good. Bypass. nice. We really brought out that texture there of that shaker that we didn't even really know we had. Much more moody. Dial back the fade a bit, because now I've heard it back in the mix, you know, we've added quite a lot of gain onto that, so we just want to pull back the fader, because otherwise it's going to put itself too far forward. And I think what we also need is, it wants a reverb as well. So let's send that to our reverb bus. Head over to our reverb, reduce the decay, size, and a nice and boxy. Back to our hat. Yeah, that's where it's at. We've got these chords here. I'm not going to do too much of that. I might just trim down on the low end, just to help sit in the mix better. Other than that, I think we'll leave that. Maybe we'll come back to it in a bit once we've done our other elements. So we've got this bass here, and this is quite a complex bass sound and timbre, because we've kind of got this really gnarly mid-range, almost high end to it, and this wompy sort of low end. And again, it's that kind of middle portion I just want to bring out a bit, but not too much, you know. So let's isolate that a bit more. Probably about there. And I just want to, again, not really lift that so much, but just give it some texture. I think gentle saturation on that. Again, just to give it a bit of character, you know. Dial back a bit. Do it up. And with this, I think we want to kind of bring up the high end on that a bit, you know. Because we've taken a lot of high end out of our hats, you know, that kind of shaker loop. We've taken a lot of shizzle out there, so we know we've got room to play now in terms of that high frequency spectrum area. So we can quite safely introduce some higher frequencies now back into that area without worrying too much about muddying the mix. Now we'll check it back in the mix whenever it's going and just, you know, do a kind of balance check, but let's play with that. Probably about there in terms of what we want to kind of lift out of this sound. I think tape might be a good one, or maybe just straight saturation on the gentle. Yeah. Subtle, just lifts out the detail slightly. Now we could just use these tone controls on this band specifically, just to really enhance that, the high end of the high ends, you know. Gives it a bit more kind of crispness, a bit more shizzle. I'm going to dial back a bit. Dial back a bit on the fader, you know, because it's important when you're introducing gain or things that might add gain to the signal, such as saturation, because it's introducing harmonics and it's adding to that signal. It's important we do balance check and just kind of bring our levels back down to where they were or near enough. So I think that's pretty good, you know, it's kind of lent itself to a bit more of a moody atmosphere, or actually real kind of texture and detail there. Let's do a kind of sanity check on this, bypass everything in terms of effects. Kind of rather plain Jane sort of groove. And now with the effects on, yeah, it's got texture, it's got tone, it's got vibe. Effects off. Back in. You know, we've really started to hone a kind of style there, you know, just taking a plain loop and giving it some kind of sound of our own, you know, and honed in on that. Now, you know, there's a few things we need to talk about when we're kind of doing multi-band saturation with Saturn across the tracks like that. Now, we've got 5 tracks there, and really, you know, every time you're kind of chopping up the audio band on Saturn, at the band areas where the crossover point is, it's going to introduce, once you've kind of chopped the band, it's going to introduce some slight, what they call phase incoherence, and, you know, that can kind of demonstrate itself as kind of a slight smearing. And across 5 tracks, you know, kind of, you know, fairly judicial use of it there. We're not really going to hear that or notice that. But Saturn does have some features that kind of will help if it starts to become a problem. And we've got the linear phase aspect, which kind of reduces or removes any kind of phase smearing incoherence that may happen because of those kind of cut points there. We can also change the crossover points of the of where we sliced our bands to use, you know, different dB ratings on the kind of filter cutoffs. And also, you know, when you introduce a lot of saturation, especially when you're really cranking the dial, it can introduce aliasing. Now, FabFilter themselves have got a really, really good informative video on aliasing, what it is, you know, and how they deal with it. And I, you know, if you want to geek out about that stuff, because it is quite interesting, then I'm going to link it in the description so you can have a look. Suffice to say that you can turn on oversampling, and that increases the internal sampling of Saturn. What that means is any aliasing that's present, it kind of pushes it up the audio spectrum, sticks it just outside of the audible range, so it doesn't really become a problem then. But in our use, you know, 5 tracks, fairly easy use of Saturn. It's not really too much of a problem. We don't have to be too conscious about it, but we do need to watch it. If we had 30 tracks and we're applying that kind of multi-band chop up on every track, you know, there's going to be a big cumulative effect there, and we need to be conscious about that, because if we go in and wanted to maintain a good audio quality at the end of a chain, that might start eating into that kind of quality aspect. So something to be conscious of. I mean, the way I use it, and I think, you know, the way you guys should use it in your tracks, is using it like this on 2, 3, 4 really key elements, just to add texture, bring out the detail and the timbre of that kind of element, that track that you want, that's really kind of singing, or you can hear but you just want to pick out and you want to lift off. And, you know, for me, a vocal part, let's add some sheen there with Saturn, great. Bass lines is another killer feature, you know, I'll use it on. So I'll duplicate the bass track and I'll EQ it literally in 2. So I'll have 1 track of the bass, just low ends, just the low end kind of rumble and third. And then I'll high pass the second duplicated track, just so we've got the high end. And then I'll slap Saturn on the high end, chop up the audio spectrum of that particular track, and really crank up the dial on some of the high end element of the bass. so we get some nice kind of raspy or, you know, cassette vibe or whatever it is we're going for. We're not touching our bass area, you know. And I might also stick one on a kind of main lead or some chords, bit of a bit reduction, nothing crazy, but just to kind of allow the kind of synth tones to kind of pluck through, you know, the rest of the elements of the mix. And perhaps maybe on a shaker loop or hat loop like we've seen here. So 3, 4, 5 elements, you know, in your tracks to really just the key things that the listener's going to be listening for, you know, focusing on. Use Saturn to kind of bring out the texture in those elements, bring out the interest, allow the ear to kind of lock onto it a bit better, you know, keep the listener's engagement and interest going. So that's, you know, where I think you can get most value out of Saturn. I mean, we can absolutely use it at the end of the mastering chain as well, just straight across, chopping up, or just an overall saturation sheen maker, you know. And we might explore that in another video as well, but it's probably beyond the scope of where we're at the moment on terms of what we're looking at. So there we have it, you know. I mean, from that to that, great vibe, you know, really easy, really simple. I think you guys can take away that, start using that in your tracks. Don't be afraid to crank that knob, chopped up those bands, apply different settings and see how it, you know, it's working on your tracks. Put it back in the mix. How's that sound, you know? Hopefully something for you to take away. What a great versatile plugin. It's available on our store as well, and if you haven't visited, you've got over 700 products, you know, you can take a look on. We've got plugins, sound packs, effects, synths, MIDI packs, Ableton packs. It's all there for you, you know. And you know, maybe you're not in the market for anything at the moment. We've got great free content sections as well that I'll link down below, because no obligation. Just head over to the site, go on the free content section. Lots of loops, samples, things you can get going with. We've got free audio plugins, free synths as well that we link to, that you can grab and just start using straight away. You can stick your email in just to subscribe to the newsletter, and we do free content drops occasionally, and it also gives you access to a higher tier of kind of free content you download as well. So it's all there for you at Sound 7. I'll link that in. Just head over, explore it in your own time and see what you can find. Stick it into your productions, have fun, you know, look for your sound, and yeah, we'll see you at the next episode, and take care, have fun.